Good evening. It's David Kieve. I'm the president of EDF Action. I'm delighted to welcome you all to a really special program we've got going on tonight. Our focus tonight is extreme weather, and we've got two top-notch experts and guests joining us, and one of my favorite colleagues as well. We've got Congressman Eric Sorensen, who will lead us off and join us first, followed by someone who has done more to highlight the connection between the climate crisis and extreme weather than just about anyone, renowned meteorologist John Morales. Wanted to remind each of you that you can type in the comments or chat from where you're watching with questions. And please do tell us where you're joining us from and who you are. We'd love for this to be a really robust back and forth and a friendly exchange instead of a one-way conversation. Please enter in the chat with any questions you might have. Our overview of our conversation tonight, we're focused on extreme weather and worsening disasters in the face of climate change. Today's speakers will be focused on NOAA. NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's part of the Department of Commerce, and it's part of a constellation of federal agencies and programs that work together to keep Americans safe before and during storms. We're also going to be focused a little bit on cuts to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration. FEMA's been a political football in this administration, and it can't be. It is a vitally important resource to people, Americans, our brothers and sisters, who are hurting at times of extraordinary loss because of especially extreme weather events. So let's welcome in Congressman Eric Sorensen. I'll just very, very quickly introduce him and share a little bit about him, because I hate sitting on screen while people are reading my whole bio, so I wouldn't subject you to that. But Congressman Sorensen represents Illinois' 17th District in the House of Representatives. He was a member of the Armed Services Committee and the House Ag Committee. His district includes Quad Cities, Rockford, Peoria, and Bloomington Normal. Before coming to Congress, sir, you were a local TV meteorologist in Rockford and the Quad Cities for more than 20 years. And I was joking in our prep session, you're a recovering meteorologist. You can't quite shake it. With that, I will turn it over to you to talk a little bit about some of the incredible legislation that you've led and the stake for our EDF Action members.
Yeah, well, thank you, David, for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for being here in an important conversation. I want to thank Environmental Defense Fund for inviting me to participate here tonight. I'm so proud to represent Illinois' 17th congressional district in the Congress, but being the only meteorologist in the Congress is a tremendous honor. It's not because, as meteorologists that we're right every day, right? I earned my spot in Congress because I had the ability in my career as a meteorologist to explain the why, right? It's not just showing models and saying that there's a 30% chance of rain. It has to be more than that. So being the best meteorologist you can be means earning the trust of the people that you serve. And for me, it was graduating from Northern Illinois University and then taking my first job in Lufkin, Texas. It was chasing tornadoes and being chased there at the beginning of my career. It was reporting live on a Hurricane Lily, along the Louisiana coast. I believe it was 2003. But then it was coming back home to Rockford, Illinois, which is my hometown, which is now in the district that I serve in Congress. A lot of us, as meteorologists, we share the same mentors. For me, it was Chief Meteorologist Emeritus Tom Skilling in Chicago. I always remember the call that I had from him, and I think it was back in the mid-2000s, and he said, the science is in, the climate is changing, and we have an obligation to report on it. And so, as I agreed with, his sentiment, and I agreed on my obligation to make sure that my community understood what was going on, I went to my news director, and I remember at the time she said, Eric, we can't afford to lose half of our viewing audience when you start talking about a political issue. And I said, well, it doesn't have to be that way. And I went to, my general manager, and he told me the same thing. But it was a couple of weeks later that our corporate news director came in, and he understood that as a meteorologist, I was doing things in a different way. I was explaining why things were happening. And that was the only reason why he said yes. I explained to him that I was going to give the why. And I said, we can tell what the audience not just agrees with, but what the audience wants to hear, wants to digest, wants to taste. I said that will come through voicemails and emails and Nielsen data. This was a time before there was social media, and it wasn't surprising to me as a meteorologist that the ratings actually went up. We tried it Tuesday night at 6, and the ratings on Tuesday night at 6 went up, and we got the response back. And then I became the authority on the subject. And I brought that same commitment when I moved from Rockford to the Quad Cities, where my managers let me do the same thing, and we got the same results. So people were seeing the things change out their windows, and I'll say that the elected leaders kind of ignored their plight, and especially it was the farmers. In my district, I happen to live in the hometown of John Deere. One of the biggest reasons why, I ever wanted to do this job was because I was helping the people, right? And the farmers pushed me over the finish line. They needed me to do this work in Washington that no one had ever done before. And that leads us to today. I'll be honest, now is the time for our country to continue to lead the world when it comes to combating climate change. We must make sure that the next generation is resilient. We must make sure that we improve weather forecasting and we transition to a clean energy grid. But just as we did, I'll go back to 2017 to 2021. We had the same administration that was undermining science, that was rolling back the investments that we've made. They were trying to dismantle NOAA and NASA and the National Weather Service, maybe less than today, but today the fighting is there. FEMA is facing funding shortfalls and staffing shortages, and billions in clean energy projects have been canceled. But let's not overlook the hundreds, if not thousands, of dedicated meteorologists at NOAA and the National Weather Service who are working tirelessly, but also have colleagues who were fired, laid off, or forced out. Earlier this year, the workforce was cut by some 20%. These actions make it harder for communities to recover after destructive storms and degrading weather forecasts. And we know, as meteorologists, as forecasters, if you take away, balloon data, weather models become rife with error. And when data becomes suspect, our forecasts become less accurate. Doppler radars will go into disrepair, and then entire communities are put at risk. And I didn't think that my work here in the U.S. House of Representatives would be so important when it comes to meteorology. But if I'm here to speak out and to take action against attacks to our profession, I'm going to do it. And it's not going to be political. It's going to be practical. Because I'll tell you what, and I think we all agree with this, every American deserves the information they need to be safe. It's why that I say a lot of times that I got to Congress without any political baggage. I didn't even come here with political carry-on, but that also means that having the meteorologist elected, not, because I became the mayor first and then I was elected to Congress, because I'm the meteorologist that's here, I was able to work with Republican Congressman Mike Flood. Also, his last name is Flood. Of course, I'm going to try to work with him. Mike Flood represents Nebraska, and so when we needed to work to protect the National Weather Service, he said, yes, Eric, I want to work with you. I went to work with Texas Congressman Nate Moran. He represents Northeast Texas, and we've worked together on a rural weather communication bill. I worked across the aisle with Republican Congresswoman Ashley Hinson in Iowa to make sure that our region is strengthened with respect to increasing flooding and increasing drought resilience for agriculture. I joined the Modernize the National Weather Service Communication Network because I remembered how important, as a meteorologist, NWS chat was. We needed to make sure that the funding came to this critical piece of communication so that communities wouldn't be put at risk. But I'll tell you right now, and quite possibly the thing that I'm most proud of going forward is developing a National Weather Safety Board. You know, similar to the work that happens at the NTSB after there's an air crash. We need the NWSB to research complex weather disasters with the sole purpose of identifying the biggest factors that lead to a high cost of life and property. And this all came about because of the deadly floods that we had on the 4th of July of this year. You know, I knew as a meteorologist that more needed to be done, and it needed to be done from here on Capitol Hill. But Congress doesn't know what to legislate if we don't have meteorologists who are at the table and an independent board that is going to help us identify how the policy needs to change to protect the people. And so this National Weather Safety Board that we're working in this office already has gaining bipartisan support. So I'll wrap up, and I want this discussion to be lively and and learning. But I'm grateful for the work, not just that we can do here in Congress in a time where politics seems to run amok, but also for partnerships with EDF and everyone who's in this environmental and weather fight to do what's right. Fully funding FEMA and NOAA and the National Weather Service, it's all critical to keeping Americans safe now and ensuring that we're ready for the next big weather storm. I want you to know that you're always going to have a partner in me here to protect these essential government programs and agencies, but then also the public servants who don't get thanked on the other end. And so I'm glad to be with you here tonight with so many stakeholders in atmospheric science who are committed to all of the work in front of us. And thank you all for having me.
Congressman, thank you so much for being here. I just want to double tap on one thing you said. You talked about how your approach as a meteorologist was to earn the trust of the people you serve. Yeah. Thank you for doing that for 20 years in their homes, in their living rooms, on their televisions, and thank you for now doing it in the halls of Congress. Thank you for also sharing your deep expertise on these topics with me and with our audience. Really, really grateful to you for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Okay. Well, our next guest, I am every bit as excited to welcome him as I was to have Congressman Sorensen with us. John Morales' 4-decade-long career includes civil service at NOAA's National Weather Service, which we've just talked about with Congressman Sorensen, as well as decades of experience as a certified consulting and certified broadcast meteorologist. He's a pioneer in climate communications, providing climate context on TV and social media platforms. As a scientist, he was exalted to honorary member of the American Meteorological Society and named a science defender by the Union of Concerned Scientists. As a communicator, he's a multiple Emmy Award winner and was inducted into the National Academy of Television Arts and Science Silver Circle. Please welcome John Morales.
Thank you, David. Good to be here. And let me be the first to raise my hand there for the congressman for the NWSB. I'd be happy to be a part of that if they do get that approved. To the Environmental Defense Fund, which is such a great partner with Cornell's Atkinson Center for Sustainability. I am on their board and so proud of the work that is done at frankly, the leading university in terms of where the rubber meets the road, in terms of applied sciences. And Atkinson Center for Sustainability does a lot of that work. So happy to be here representing them and representing so many of the other aspects that I'm involved in. Thank you, David, and thank you, EDF.
Well, we're honored to have you here. I've got a few questions for you, but I already feel like I've talked too much tonight, and I'm eager to encourage our folks in the chat to weigh in. So they've done a great job of listening and weighing in with where they are. And I want to especially acknowledge that one of our viewers has shared that he or she is hoping to get their degree in atmospheric science in college. So I think we're doing some important work here. Sir, this year's been relatively quiet on the hurricane season front, but yet we saw one monster storm in Hurricane Melissa. Is this a frightening new trend?
So first off, it was quiet for the United States. The first time since 2015 that we had no landfalling hurricanes in the United States. So solely from our perspective in the US, it was quiet. But the vast majority of the metrics show that this hurricane season was more busy than an average season. It was particularly busy because we had so many monster hurricanes, not just Melissa, which of course impacted Jamaica in such a severe way, as well as Cuba and then on to the Bahamas, but also because of the other Category 4 and 5 hurricanes that we saw out in the Atlantic this year. They missed land, thankfully, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we continue to see evidence of a greater propensity for tropical storms to reach these catastrophic Category 4 and 5 levels of intensity. And the Atlantic Basin this year was once again an example of that. So, is it a trend? Very much so, not just in the Atlantic, but around the world. It's not that we're getting more tropical storms or more hurricanes. So, next time you see a social media post that says, hey, we had 30 tropical storms in the Atlantic in the year, I think it was 2020, let's blame that on climate change. Actually, that's incorrect, right? You cannot blame the number of storms on climate change. But what you do know that there is an attributing factor for is the fact that once the storms form, the physics, the thermodynamics of how these storms feed off of the warm ocean has changed. And therefore, the speed limit, the highest potential wind speed that you can get in a hurricane is increasing. And that's why we're seeing these very catastrophic systems more and more often, which puts everyone at risk.
And this is an unscripted follow-up question, so I apologize, sir. But the storms are also carrying a lot more moisture and dropping a lot more rainfall. Is that also accurate?
That is accurate. The warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor in it. When it rains, the rain rates are higher, and therefore it can rain harder. Also, there is evidence that the storms are moving slower. A slower moving hurricane can deposit more rainfall simply because it's lingering for a longer period of time over a certain spot.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And I think I know where this is going because you've already started to address it. But you wrote last year that Hurricane Helene is a harbinger for the future. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means?
Sure. So, again, we alluded to that already. So Hurricane Helene was also one of these catastrophic Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. But the other particularity about Helene was the immense ability to produce precipitation, which led to that horrific situation in Western North Carolina, the Appalachians in general, including Tennessee and surrounding states, where we just saw this incredible damage produced by the landslides produced by the flash floods. Also, may I add, when you have a stronger hurricane, the potential for those very damaging winds to extend much further inland than they used to, is something that we saw in Helene, where you had wind gusts to 100 miles an hour in flat places. I'm not talking in the mountains, in flat places well inland in Georgia, of all places, even though the hurricane made landfall in Florida. So, because they're stronger, their impact is spread wider, it rains harder, and not to make, we haven't even talked about storm surge here, but we all know what's gone on with Ian and Helene and Milton and Idalia and all these other hurricanes that have impacted of late the Gulf Coast.
Thank you. Congressman Sorensen talked about this some, but our federal agencies are critical in disaster prevention. How does the data from federal agencies inform your role and the role of other meteorologists in this effort? What do they do that people should know about?
Oh, so many important things. And again, remember, I spent the beginning of my career with the National Weather Service and NOAA doing these very things. Releasing weather balloons, for example, was part of my duties very early on in my career. So glad I got to get my hands dirty with that to really understand that process. These weather balloons across a good chunk of the U.S. have gone AWOL. They're not being released with these instruments called radiosondes to measure all kinds of meteorological elements that are crucial for our ability to monitor, forecast, and warn for dangerous weather. Some offices are either having to release them once instead of twice a day, or releasing them at odd hours because they don't have the personnel, they don't have the staff to do it at the hour that they're supposed to, very early in the morning as the sun is rising, or sometimes they're not even going up at all. So during parts of this year, we've had periods in which there's been 17% of the US network of weather balloons gone missing. And as a consequence, this hurricane season in particular, the American GFS model has been basically thrown out the window by weather forecasters, by hurricane specialists like me. That's one of my roles, right? At NBC6 in Miami, I am a hurricane specialist on TV. We could no longer look at the GFS model, the American model for weather forecasting, because its projections were trash. Now, I don't want to make the leap entirely to tell you that this is a direct consequence of the missing weather balloons, because in theory, that would have impacted the other weather models around the world. But there is some evidence that even the European model was being impacted by this. The only ones that were not impacted were the ones that don't forecast the weather based on physical science. They simply forecast the weather based on machine learning. In other words, artificial intelligence models, which had no problem with the lack of weather balloons because, well, they don't need that to recognize weather patterns.
That is fascinating, but deeply alarming. I mean, 17%, that's nearly 1 in 5 total balloons. AWOL, as you put it. What should our elected officials be doing at the state and federal level to mitigate extreme weather disasters, or to speak up about the challenges that we're facing here today?
Well, first and foremost, I'm going to second what Congressman Sorensen said. NOAA needs to be protected. And under NOAA's umbrella, we have the National Weather Service. I know from colleagues that work at the Miami office that they're still down, to this day, 50% meteorologists in their staff, right? Morale is down, stress levels are high, and there's going to come a point where they're going to be stretched too thin. And in a severe weather event, perhaps, like Congressman Sorensen alluded to, perhaps have worse performance, if you will, in saving lives and property, because you simply can't do it with the level of staffing that we currently have at the National Weather Service. Not to mention the fact that the proposed fiscal year 2026 budget from the White House, which for NOAA in particular has yet to be decided, okay, this has yet to be voted on, includes proposed cuts to NOAA's national laboratories, the National Severe Storms Laboratory, the Hurricane Research Division, every carbon dioxide monitoring station that is sponsored under the NOAA umbrella. All those would be shuttered, and hundreds of scientists would be out the door should the White House proposal for the budget pass. Now, thankfully, what to do to protect it? Well, you stand up for NOAA. The appropriations committees in Congress have been, I would say, quite hostile to this White House proposal in a bipartisan way, so that hopefully these draconian cuts won't come to pass. Beyond that, I can tell you that both at the state and federal level, mitigation must start with turning off the faucet of carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and other greenhouse gases that are continuing to increase the temperature of our planetary system from the atmosphere to the oceans. If we don't turn off the faucet, this is not going to end. And yes, I will tell you that adaptation measures are going to have to be implemented, because it's going to be very difficult to keep global temperatures underneath or under the aspirational goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And if we continue to warm, severe weather events are going to continue to multiply and become even stronger and more catastrophic. So therefore, adaptation needs to be a part of this. And I'll just leave you with this thought regarding adaptation. You know how much pushback there's been on a carbon tax. Well, we're already paying a carbon tax for the consequences of the severe weather, which is impacting our GDP, which is impacting our states, our communities, our counties, our cities, with dangerous and damaging weather.
To say nothing of the cost of insurance in places like Florida, as you know, you and your friends and neighbors know all too well. Sir, with your blessing, speaking of Florida, I'd like to bring on one of my favorite colleagues, the Environmental Defense Fund and EDF Action State Director for Florida, Dawn Sheriffs, who's going to talk to us about a tool that the Environmental Defense Fund has developed, specifically EDF's NOAA map. Dawn?
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. And John, great to see you again. Really delighted to spend tonight with all of you. I think it's really important for us to remember that Americans are benefiting every single day from NOAA's up-to-date weather reports, storm tracking, fisheries management, and numerous other public services. I'm going to give you a few examples of what that looks like down here in hurricane country, but we are really dependent on accurate forecasting so we can figure out where to do things like evacuate or put emergency services. So if members of Congress or congressional staff or constituents in districts that want to educate their congressional staffers, they want to see how and where NOAA benefits their constituents, this map is the perfect tool. It will show you where the NOAA labs are, the programs and partnerships and major offices by state and in congressional districts, so that you can help educate your policymakers and the public to understand what the local footprint and impact is. This is where the science happens, the mapping and the modeling that provides the information to weather forecasters, to insurance companies, to local planners, trying to figure out where to build America's infrastructure. We really need to understand that it's not just in Florida, but I'm going to give you some Florida examples because we know that NOAA is responsible for having restored a red snapper fishery that is worth tens of millions of dollars annually to the Florida economy. So maybe climate isn't your thing, but you enjoy fishing, right? We know that the research at the National Coral Reef Monitoring Programs are tracking risks to critical habitat in the only living coral barrier reef in the continental United States of America. We really have to understand that, we've talked a lot about meteorology tonight, but I can't underscore what John Morales said enough. We are seeing rapid intensification of storms. That means that when you are living this, you can go to bed at night thinking a storm is you're going to wake up, it's going to be a category 1, and it's going to be, making landfall 100 miles away, and wake up the next morning to a very different reality. And we cannot make good decisions if we don't have information coming that is best in class. And the reality is, for a very long time, the US has been a global leader on weather forecasting. We cannot back off now. We know already that reckless DOGE attacks and imposed cuts to agencies, some that were approved by Congress, have delayed research. And those cuts are putting real lives at risk as the systems become more dangerous. So just want to make sure that we're being, clear here. There are communities, and I'm going to use Cedar Key as an example. They have faced 3 hurricanes in 13 months. There's been a lot of talk about, maybe it should be a private sector thing. We should just let the private sector do it. Can you imagine having to pay for life-saving information or risk losing it when you need it the most? Should communities be able to access information based on their, economic posture? There's really, really long-term risks here that we have to consider by holding Congress accountable and making sure that we're getting the funding through and supporting NOAA and FEMA so that we can make the right decisions to protect our communities.
Thanks, Dawn. Really, really grateful to you for all that you're doing, including being with us here tonight. Eager to take a few questions from the audience here as I scroll through the chat. I encouraged folks to make it an active conversation, and they've been doing that. But unfortunately, some of the questions are getting a little lost. So I've got one from Kelly. What needs to be done to get more personnel for NOAA, National Weather Service, et cetera? Are there petitions that we as individuals can sign to add pressure to get what these fine organizations need? I will sign them all, several exclamation points. John, it feels like it's mostly a defensive effort right now to keep the structures that have been built. But what, other than joining discussions like this, would you recommend people do, both to educate themselves further about how important these agencies and the people who work in them are, and to raise their voices to defend them?
Well, I'll remind everybody of that viral video from June 2nd, first weekday of hurricane season. I was on TV, and the folks at WTVJ, NBC6 in Miami said, well, at 4 o'clock, we want you to talk about rapid intensification. At 5 o'clock, we want you to talk about the cuts to NOAA and what that means to your work. And you might recall that what I said at the end of those 2 or 2.5 minutes was contact your representatives. I am telling you that it's not just Congressman Sorensen. Representatives that are supposed to represent their districts do realize that these severe weather events impact them all, economically, lifestyles as well. So because this is important to their constituents, it's going to be important to them, and saving NOAA and the National Weather Service is something that I've seen, at least as far as legislators are concerned. This is not from the executive branch, understand, okay? This is legislators. They realize the importance of NOAA and the Weather Service, and that is why pressure from them got National Weather Service leaders to begin the rehiring process of 450 new staff. This is something that came out a couple of months ago. The problem is that if you're familiar with the bureaucracy in government, it takes a long time to hire people. And on top of that, these folks are not going to be necessarily as experienced as the ones that used to work there. A lot of the people that left because morale was low, because they did not see a future for themselves in this new civil service, which is not like the civil service that we used to know, right? Because of the way the administration has changed that for everybody that works in there. So they took early buyouts. They took early retirements. These are people with experience that we've lost. The new ones that are coming in don't necessarily have that level of experience. And I think a lot of the damage, frankly, will take years to repair.
If I could add to that, I think that one of the things that sort of we've had to really calibrate is when people say, oh, well, AI can do it. So the problem is that you actually need to make sure that you're calibrating the models. That's what these scientists are doing. They're taking new technology, but they're actually verifying it with real data from things like weather balloons to make sure that it is accurate. If you're like me, you at some point may have used an AI tool and got a really funky answer, right? We can't just assume that we can automate weather prediction and not have real science backing it up.
Which begs the question, which I'll ask you offline, Dawn, what that really funky answer was and what the question was. There's another question in the chat from Alan. He asked whether or not hurricanes are becoming stronger around the world, or especially so in the Atlantic and around Florida.
So the answer is yes, they're becoming stronger around the world. These are findings that verify what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change had predicted, that they indicated that it wouldn't be a higher count of storms, but we could get stronger storms because, again, we're changing the thermodynamics of everything. Let me tell you, though, a fascinating statistic about the Atlantic. Never have we had 12 Category 5 hurricanes in the span of 10 years until now. And granted, even though our records go back to 1851, in terms of a good, robust record of hurricane and tropical storm conditions in the Atlantic, this is a trend that we're seeing in recent years, and it includes the satellite era. as well, 1980 to the present. Satellites, where weather satellites were actually reliable. I understand that satellites were up there in 1960, but as far as weather satellites monitoring the Atlantic, we start in 1980 for that. And again, never have we seen a stretch with so many of these catastrophic hurricanes over a decade's span.
Terrific. Want to give a shout out to someone, Carol, in the chat, who says that she's been a climate activist for 55 years and participating helps keep her from despair. Some of the discussion in the chat is around how dispiriting these times that we're living in. Another question in the chat says, it seems that climate deniers like children think that they can, quote, cover their eyes, i.e. stop the information flow and the science input. Climate change and impact on the earth will just stop happening. We're seeing some of that in these moments, right? With the decision to stop tracking storms that cause $1 billion worth of damage end up. What would you tell our audience, John, about whether or not failure to measure has any impact on our ability to respond in a crisis?
Well, the good news about the $1 billion disaster count is that Climate Central has taken up that duty. They already released the count up to October, I think, in 2025. They will continue to move, to move forward with that football, if you will. So glad to see them picking up on that. But I mean, a good example is this idea that we're going to stop measuring carbon dioxide concentrations at all the NOAA labs, including the one in Hawaii, which is the legacy one that dates back to the 1950s, right? Because, if we can't measure it, then it's not happening, right? I mean, it's just asinine thinking that, frankly, is a theme here. Because, not to get too deep into the weeds here, but you've all heard me on some of my some of these moments that have gone viral, or maybe some of the articles that I've written, where I'm dumbfounded by this idea where we're just totally breaking apart what was the model for the U.S. becoming the worldwide leader in science and applied science. This concept where funds are being taken away, particularly from the elite institutions, because they're not taking this away from I don't know, a college ranked 150th. They seem to only be targeting the Ivies, and sadly even some of the land grant institutions are being targeted here for cutting the federal funds that are needed to come up with better medications, build better bridges, have more fuel-efficient vehicles. All these great things that our society and worldwide society benefits from, the U.S. is taking a sledgehammer to it. I'm talking about the regime, of course, the Trump regime, taking a sledgehammer to it and not allowing the best minds that we have in this country to advance science for the benefit of society.
Great. Sir, do you have time for one more question? Because I see an interesting one in the chat, or should we wrap things up?
I have time.
Great. Congressman Sorensen talked about this a little bit, about some of the barriers that he experienced when he was first interested in talking about climate as a young weatherman, close to 25 years ago now. But you've got colleagues who don't spend a lot of time connecting the dots between weather and climate. Is your sense that they do it, that they don't talk about these issues because they're blocked by the sort of powers that be in their station, or because they're uncomfortable, or they don't feel like experts, or is it some combination of both?
No, it's not uncomfortable because they don't feel as experts. Because, when you're communicating geoscience in general, I mean, think about it. Broadcast meteorologists are asked to talk about earthquakes, tsunamis, shooting stars, right? Eclipses. So, we can certainly talk about climate change, and we don't feel uncomfortable talking about it. What does make some broadcast meteorologists uncomfortable is, they don't have the courage to get on TV and state the state of the science, explain the state of the science. because as we've gone over a million times already, this is not a political issue. It's only political in what we're going to do about it. It's not political in terms of what's already happening, which everybody can see with their plain eyes. So why not explain what's happening? Why not explain that there are contributing factors linked to climate, to many of these disasters, and sometimes I even call them unnatural disasters that we're seeing around the planet. That connection is there. Attribution science is a real thing. It exists. So it allows us to make those connections. Let's go ahead and explain that. And yes, there is occasionally stations that will simply say, you will not talk about this on air. Many in the audience recognize that there are some television station ownership groups which have an agenda, which will keep their broadcast meteorologists from doing this work, because if they dare to do it, they're going to lose their jobs.
Terrific. Well, thank you, sir, for, as you put it, having the courage to explain the state of the science. It's easy to see why you're a multiple Emmy Award winner for your skills as a communicator. And this has been really, really fun for me. And I know it's been fun for Dawn and for those in our audience as well. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us here this evening. We're going to drop in the chat an invitation to view other upcoming events on EDF Action's Mobilize page. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion as much as I have and as much as we have, and I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon or evening.